You know, the sacral is always trying to move everything away into the reproductive, into the nurturing field. And so the whole business of collective transcendence normally in the not-self gets stuck in the sacral. And so it ends up being fed into all of these tribal things, but it has two things that happens to it. The collective potential of transcendence that we've seen both in the abstract and in the logic, if they do not get past the sacral center, what you get is you get all the intellectual blah blah about mysticism coming out of the intelligence of the spleen, and you get all the tribal ceremonial stuff that's coming out of the emotions, but you don't get actual tribal transcendence. In other words, you don't actually get to go through what appears to be theoretically a pattern that's of value, and to experientially go through that, to go through the process of self-actualization to see its worth. And then in the repetition of this process, through the practice that's inherent in the abstract process, you get to a point of, for example, in the language we use, you get to a point of deconditioning. You get to a point where you can leave behind the old pattern and you can begin to work on a new pattern. I think the most difficult thing for abstract beings is when you're dealing with the 2946. That is, when you're dealing with the tantra of the sacral to the identity in the abstract process. It's very poetic, actually, that relationship between the 29 and the 46. The 29 is the abysmal, it's the deep within the deep. It really is this very, very dark place where you do not know if you will ever see the light. And on the other side of this, when you go up to the 46th gate, you have pushing upward into the kingdom of heaven, says the old I Ching. So in essence, when you're looking at this channel, you're looking at something quite fascinating. In other words, what they're saying about the nature of what the experiential process is, that you must begin the experiential process in the dark. It's only logical people that want to bring their predetermined patterns with them when they enter into an experience and then are immediately critical because it's not precisely what they wanted in the first place or expected. And one of the great dilemmas of the abstract process, one of the great pains of the abstract process is expectation. That expectation is devastating to the abstract being. Because you can see that in the 29th gate. 29th gate says, look, experience, just sink into it. Fall into the darkness of the abysmal. You don't know what's there. I mean, it is the gate of commitment. And the thing to understand about the commitment to any experience is that if you're not correctly committed to an experience, there's no way that you can find transcendence in its mundane reality. And everything about transcendence is that it's rooted in the mundane. It is not special. The greatest job of the collective is to try to convince people that transcendence is a collective right and not something limited to some kind of tribal bullshit. You know, where you're locked into a system that says this is the only way that it works. When in fact the collective knows that that's not true. You know, that there is as many ways as there are beings. So this whole business about the way you fall into the commitment is that you have to go into the commitment without prejudices. You just fall in. And this tells us everything about the experiential way. It's like, you know, when I say to people, go out into the world and experiment with your design. You know, experience what it means to live according to your strategy. And it really doesn't do you any good to analyze every moment of that process. Just fall into it. You'll know right away whether there is anything there for you or not, right away. The moment you just fall into it. And the most difficult thing for the abstract is to fall into anything. Because it's afraid. It's afraid. And it's afraid because unlike logic, there is no artificial protection. You know, logic says, okay, here's the pattern. If you do this, you get this, and then you get that, and then you get that. And the abstract says, fall in, and let's throw the dice and see what happens. Because we don't know what's going to happen. And of course, you can see the difference in that. Remember the beauty of this symmetry. If you go over in the logic process to the 18th gate, at the 18th gate you get the challenge to the pattern that wants to perfect the pattern. You know, the original Oedipus electric gate, you know, it's there to challenge the parental pattern that's been established, the way you should live your life. And then you come over to the 30th gate on the other side, and the 30th gate is the gate of the fates. You know, if you're a logical person and you see correction, it's like, okay, all right, if this is what has to be corrected, let's try it, we'll correct it, and then we'll get the next thing that we want. And then you're a 41 and you're starting off in the experiential way, and you get to the 30th gate, and the 30th gate says, it's not going to be what you thought. Sorry. Did you really think that if you did this, you were going to get that? Oh, you're a fool. And the whole process about being an abstract being is that you cannot be logical. Because it's not logical. It's not like you're protected when you leap into that void, that somehow this is a sustainable pattern that will bring you up on the other side. And you see, the difficulty with that is that when you're dealing with the tribe makes it so damn dramatic. You know, it's always big events. You know, this leaping into the void is really this huge chasm. And our lives are nothing but experience. Every moment is an experiential program. Every moment is the potential of transcendence at the mundane level. And it only exists by just being in the experience. And you cannot be in the experience if you're up in these boxes trying to control your life. The moment that you're making decisions with your mind, the moment that you're living the not-self, there is no way that the mundane carries the essential beauty that makes life worthwhile. It doesn't. It can't. You can't see it. And you can't just fall into experience because you say, oh, I can't jump into the void. I've got to go shopping. I can't fall into the void. I have things to do today. I'm looking forward to jumping into the void next week on my vacation. You know? And it's all the time. Isn't that nice, the way finger clicking can be translated into 3 languages simultaneously? That's really great. And there's a real difference between the Russian, the Spanish, and the Italian. You know, it's a different click. You know, it's a different energy. Experience, folks, you know? The magic is there in the mundane. Most human beings think that they've got to get beyond this because that's what the tribe tells you. The tribe always holds up as examples, you know, these very, very special tribal trips and says, hey, look, this is the way. And it's not. And leaping into the void, you know, the 29 at the mundane level, when you do an analysis for somebody and they're not self and they've got the 29 and you're going, oh, shit, you know. And how did I used to describe that? You know, can I borrow your money? Yes. Can I fuck you up? Yes. Can I steal your life? Yes. All the 29th gate does, yeah. Sure. You know, the 29-5, the classic, right? You know, say yes till you die. You know, until the weight is so overwhelming that you just crush. And you know, if you don't know how to enter... I didn't snap my fingers on that one.
It's experiential.
It's very experiential. And then you have the 29th gate, and you look at that, and you look at people's designs, and you see it gives them so many problems. So many problems. The inability to be able to discern what commitment. It's not like there's a void. You know, every experience begins in darkness. That's its beauty. I mean, that's its beauty. And what we know about the experiential way is that as you move through that process existentially, only when you get to the other end can you see whether there's anything that you've learned. Can you see if there's anything worthwhile? Can you see whether within the collective that you can actually share this with the other as a way of endowing them in some way with another perspective in their consciousness? The 29th gate operates out of the sacral center. It's one of these classic classic sacral configurations. It says so clearly, there is no commitment that is worthy of you unless it is a commitment that you respond to. The horror of the abstract people that I've seen in my life with the 29th gate, who have jumped into things that have been devastating for them, saying yes to things that they can't get out of cleanly, that they can't be in cleanly, that ultimately hurts them, hurts others, that burns them out. I mean, that's not what this gate is about. It's not about blindly saying yes just because somebody thinks that there is something that they should jump into because their minds are telling them that. And the whole thing about the nature of the experiential way is that you cannot even begin it unless you enter into it correctly. And you can see what human beings do. They take the homogenized path. It's safe, you know. It's not their path. It's not their way. They are not their own authority. They are not unique. They are not operating correctly. They just go under this big, huge umbrella. I had so many years of being in the aura of people that hate themselves. I had so many years. I could not, there would be days when I was on the road where I'd do 6 or 7 readings in a day, and I'd take in this malaise, this deep, deep, deep lack of value, lack of purpose. People who look at themselves and don't like what they see. I mean, it's a horror what's out there. You know, and all of this comes back to it that if you don't operate correctly, it doesn't matter what any of these configurations are. It's very nice for me to be able to describe format energies in this way, so that you can see that within the collective is a great light. It really is. You know, it is a way in which all of us can be embraced in a process that's worthy. And yet for the collective to get to that position is very, very difficult. You know, that abyss that you have to leap into, that darkness that you jump into, you have no armor other than your authority. There is nothing else. And it's only when you're operating in that environment with your authority that you get to pushing upward into the kingdom of heaven. It's the magic of this channel, you know, succeeding where other people fail or failing where other people succeed. And most of it is just failing. Blind commitment, saying yes, endlessly, never entering into the experience correctly, never having the opportunity to reflect at the other end. And out of that, no potential to be the witness, to be the prodigal, to be the one that can share with the collective. I mean, it's collective experience that saves us. You know, I used to do the joke about the hunter-gatherers, you know, then a couple of them be walking along, you know, and one of them would see a mushroom. He'd say, hey, that looks interesting. He take the mushroom, he eats it, he drops dead. You know, the other one comes back and says, hey, don't eat this mushroom. I mean, this is the collective. The collective is here to experience and let you know. And without them, there is no true guide. It was very easy for me from day one to be able to explain to anybody who really had a logical mind the logic of this knowledge. But there's no proof in that. It's just nothing more than theory until it's put into practice. Everything about the abstract is anything that's ever going to be worthwhile on this planet. Anything that human beings are ever going to do on this planet. It has to be done the abstract way. There is no other way. It is the human experiential way. It is our genetics. So commitment becomes something that, you know, I've dealt with thousands of couples who have problems and, you know, all kinds of distortion in relationships because people don't enter into their relationships correctly. They make commitments incorrectly, and then they have to deal with the pain of what it is to go through that process. It is much more difficult for the 9 to get to the 5. For the 42 to get to the 29 than it is for the 9 to get to the 5. It's so difficult to enter into the abstract process correctly. When I started this morning, I was talking about the beauty of the symmetry of the logic and the abstract as a collective circuitry, and that you basically slice the body graph in half and you have these mirrors that appear. But there is a huge difference in that mirror. On one side, you have the very cool splenic logic. And on the other side, you have the hot and cold emotional system. And the emotional system, throws a spanner into the whole collective business. The abstract is locked forever into the emotional wave, whether it's an emotional gate, an emotional channel, or not. Remember something about the formats. They go straight to the brain. And when you think about the abstract mind, when you think about the 6447, the 1156, the abstract mind operates emotionally. I mean, the abstract mind operates in a wave. It just does. When the belief system of the 56 is being articulated out of the throat, it's being articulated out of the throat in terms of pleasure and pain. This is a good idea, this is a bad idea, this is good for you, this is bad for you. And not only that, but the very, very tone of the abstract voice is a tone that you immediately recognize as either being up or down. Oh, I had a terrible day today. The abstract voice. The emotions are in everything that is abstract. And so we come back to the law of the emotional system. The law of the emotional system as an authority is that there's no truth in the now. And the only way you can understand about surrender when you leap into the void is to recognize that even in the moment of leaping into the void, there is no truth. There's just the fucking void. Nothing else. Not truth. It's like all those people that used to throw drugs into their body with the assumption that they were going to find truth. No, what you did was throw something into your body. You jumped into the pit. And you see, only when the abstract process surrenders to that, only then is it possible for us to begin to truly experience things. See, my experience isn't your experience. I have no right to tell you what it's like, what it should be, how it should go. I don't know. I mean, that's the most magical thing about this knowledge of differentiation. We are all truly different, to levels that are hard to imagine. We are unique purpose as a potential. Each of us. If you take a zillion people and you put them into the same abstract process, and each of them enters into that process as themselves, and each of them leaps into that void as themselves, the end result of the reflection will be different. They will all tell you something unique. And you see, the abstract consciousness, the goal of abstract consciousness is to fill the world with concretized memory. That's why we have the internet and television and books and on and on and on. This is the ultimate goal of the abstract, to concretize memory. If you go back to the Roman Empire at its very beginning, there was one official historian. Not much of a story, not truth to be trusted. Today when anything happens, there are all kinds of perspectives on the event. There are all kinds of different feelings and experiences about the nature of something. We're here to create this enormous consciousness field, rooted in experience. And rooted in experience being unique, not homogenized. You know this old line about my way or the highway. Well, take the highway. Everybody's got their way. And the abstract insists on this. And if you don't have your way in this, if you cannot enter into this as yourself, go through an experience as yourself, every time you're in an experience and you stop in the middle because you think something's wrong, you've just lost all its value. It's gone, man. It's out the window. And you'll get stuck there over and over and over and over and over again. This is sacral. It gets very, very frustrating. And what's at the other end of leaping into that void, leaping into that darkness? The temple. These vehicles. You know, when I see people pray, get down on their knees, and it's always some symbol or some person. There's only one temple. Each one of us has our own. I mean, this is the temple. This is the greatest gift of all. Not a single one of us has the ability intellectually to understand at any given second how this vehicle operates. Nor do we have access to the millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of things that are taking place in this vehicle all the time that we take for granted as the illusion of what we think our lives are. And it's this vehicle that lives this life. You know, it's a piece of meat. It decays over time. It's nicely configured. We're given delightful software. But the only thing that we can do in these vehicles is watch. Nothing else. And only when you see that you are in a temple, and this temple is holy, and it is holy because nothing can be compared to it. Nothing. There will never, ever, ever, ever be anything like me. Ever. Or you, or anybody else. And the idea that we have any sense of similarity is because you're all fucked up and caught in the not-self. Trying to be like everybody else because you're afraid to be different. And even the people who want to be different are only different in groups. So they can all be the same different together. Which is the same thing anyway. Nobody's being themselves. Nobody taught them. It's not their fault. But it's so important to understand about the nature of what the 46th gate represents as, you know, it's part of the vessel of love. It is the identity with the body as this holy mechanism that you cannot do anything with but be in awe of it. I mean, me with my unconscious mind, and I hear myself babble day after day after day. Somebody said they got, 40 CDs of mine in their iPod. I've never thought about anything I've ever said. I mean, I can't. It's all unconscious. I mean, I'm not talking to you, my body's talking to you. My passenger is sitting inside here saying, that wasn't bad. That was pretty good, actually. That one didn't work. It's just blah, 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 blah. When I was a kid, it scared the hell out of me. You know, I'd come home, my mother said, where you been? And all of a sudden I'd go, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, inside the passenger is going, why are you saying that? I had no idea. I got an unconscious mind. See, the whole business about experience. It's why I don't like Buddha, you know. Buddha looked at this body that wasn't yours and said, let me out. Just let me out. You know? I mean, it's a piece of meat. It's primitive. Let me out of here. Eh? You know, you look at most of the theologies. Most of the theologies are based on suffer while you hear because you're going to be rewarded when you get out. I mean, that is the biggest con job ever. Ever. Consciousness, as we experience it, is the result of software in the hardware. You take the software out of the hardware, and there is nothing going on. Nothing. Until you come back again. Nothing. This is it. Right here, right now. You know? This is it. There isn't anything else. The only thing that's worthwhile in this life is here in your package. Nothing else. And it's only when you're operating correctly within this vehicle that you get to see what's here for you. That you get to see that every single human being truly has a purpose. That it's not some kind of joke. And that nobody knows what all those purposes are until those beings are awake. I can tell you what it is to be a 5-1 manifesting ego clarion. It's my job. But it's very limited. There's an enormous amount of experience that we lack. We don't have the witnesses out there that are telling us about their unique process. And these machines, you know. I've looked at so many forms of consciousness. One of the gifts that was given to me was this ability to look at these different forms. And one of the things that is so interesting to me about what it is to be human is that no matter where you look in the body graph, no matter what aspect you see, that underneath that is a potential for such purity and beauty. You know, the essence of what it is. There's so much suffering because you think you have to be in control. All this blindness. I mean, nobody believes that we're here to be blessed. That we're here to live the wonderful life. That we're here to live our lives. That life is a grace. I mean, you know, there's 3 billion of us, hungry, angry. And it's not like the other 3 billion are particularly comfortable. It is a deep, deep place of suffering and ignorance. And that the only way that you get past any of that is that by understanding any of this is meaningless. It's meaningless. It's just part of the useless knowledge I teach. The only thing that matters is that you operate correctly. And you can only operate correctly out of strategy and authority. There is no temple without it. You don't see it. People hate their bodies. They don't like their bodies getting old. They don't like the way their bodies look. I mean, we live in an age where people carve them up and change them and fix them and mask them and do this with them and do that with them. And they do, you know, they don't like it. You know, they shave them, they race them, they pump muscles with anything, you know. And they're perfect. I mean, I don't want my body to look like your body. Fuck you, I got my own. You know, get your own. Get your own version of what it is to be human. It's really nice, you know. Everybody trying to be like everybody else. Everybody caught in the moo cow syndrome, you know. Takes courage. I've seen that year after year after year in my process where people recognize truth and cannot live it. And it's all there in that 29th gate, I tell you. To be able to just fall into the experience. Let go. And every time that you're responding as a generator, every time you're informing as a manifester, all of the mechanisms we have, each of those is an act of falling. And then you see. And you don't get on the other end what you expected. Because expectation is the killer. It's the killer. You know? I'm very clear about the fact that mystical encounter is as vast and diverse as our potential for consciousness. And yet when I teach courses on encounter, as you know, it's so easy to just group them into 6 archetypes, when in fact there's so many of them. You know, but we're stuck in the not self with living in a world where there's only forests. There are no trees. It's all this layering. From the G center to the throat, when you're dealing with just looking at formats in and of themselves, that the goal of a format energy is ultimately to be able to express its power. And to express its power, it needs to be able to get to the throat. But of course, the relationship between the throat and the G center, the identity, is a projected process. There is no power there other than the power to recognize and be recognized. And for me, the combination of the 33 and the 13, this really represents that resource for humanity. That if it's not there, there is no progress. It has to be there in order for there to be progress. And it's only there when every single one of us in our uniqueness act as the prodigal. I mean, when you look at it, the 13th gate, the listener, you can begin to see that once you go through that process and you get to the other end of the process, the first thing is the reflection process. The reflection process. The most important thing that I have ever taught people is to have your own bedroom and not sleep with anyone. And it's one of the things to understand, particularly if you are abstract, but in the whole sense of this dialogue about the collective, is to recognize that to be in your own aura and to go through the process of losing consciousness in your own aura and awakening in your own aura, that this is the necessary time of reflection. Reflection is not a conscious activity. I'm not talking about sitting there and thinking about what happened to you yesterday. You have taken in the whole experience in a very deep way if you've entered into it correctly. But most of what reflection is rest. It's rest. Now, if you go home and you get into bed with somebody, you have to take their aura, their energy, and everything else. You've got to be asleep, unconscious with it. There is no time for reflection. There is no time for rest. You are not resting at all. As a matter of fact, your mechanisms, your defense system, it's all activated because your aura is dealing with the penetration. And for the abstract being, because it's so deeply connected to the emotional system, to see that it's not about the moment you're after an experience, that's not the moment that tells you its worth. It's like describing a sexual experience only from the perspective of the orgasm. It doesn't work. It doesn't. The whole thing about the abstract being is you sink in, you rise up, you rest, and then you're ready. It doesn't mean you're instantly ready to share what you've experienced, but you have been able to digest the experience, and when it's called upon, it's there for you. Remember what we looked at in the 53 with momentum. And to really see that for the abstract being, every correct experience lays the foundation for the next one. And that this momentum breeds success. That is success in being able to be accomplished in experiencing. This is what builds the abstract depth. And then you get to the throat. And of course, when you get to the throat, you get to the 33rd gate, and the 33rd gate is one of the stop codons. And it's so interesting about the abstract process. It begins with the 41st gate, which is the only start codon in genetics. And it ends with the 33rd gate, which happens to be one of the 3 stop codons. And there's something very clear about that. If you think about the 41st gate as a codon, as being the capitalization at the beginning of a genetic sentence, and if you think as the 33 as a punctuation at the end, you can see something very clear about the abstract process. It may be cyclical, but that punctuation calls for a stop. A stop. Abstract people who don't rest, they're like hamsters in the cage. And eventually it can destroy them, psychically, physically, whatever. And for no other being is rest more important than for the abstract being. Not because their body needs it. Their spirit needs it. Because they need time to digest the experience. You know, you have a friend of yours that goes through a process. The worst time to ask them about it is just when they finish. How was it for you? And they don't know. They've had no chance to digest it. None. And again, that digestion doesn't have to be a self-conscious digestion in which you're actually reflecting consciously on something with concepts. It's just about rest. It's a kind of reward. You know, it's like, hey, you did it. You know, now you can rest. You went into the deep end. You came out the other side. Now rest. And remember, I couldn't be describing anything. I mean, it's not like this has to be big mystical stuff, eh? It can be cleaning the dishes. It can be whatever it is. The whole thing about the abstract process is you just sink into the experience. It's the experience itself. Nothing else. No reflection, no nothing. Just in there, in there, in there. Let your body be in the experience. Don't interfere. Don't interfere. You know, the personality is sitting up there in the back seat screaming, stop, I want off, go left, go right. And you have to see that it's the body's experience. Let the body have its trip. Just sit back. Watch the movie. Get to the other side. Have your rest. Digest it properly. I mean, when you look at the whole process that goes from the 41 to the 35, it's all about hunger and release. You know, you're hungry, you need the experience, you go through the experience, you digest it, and you shit it out. Just the way it is. And the 33rd gate is an interesting gate because it is one of the very few gates that is not connected to the mystical process. The only other gate you can look at is the 54 for this, where you really have a deep mystical value attached to it. Because the 33rd gate is a gate of remembering, that's its mundane value. You know, so at the not-self level, the 33rd gate is somebody telling you an experience, relating to you an experience. But the 33rd gate also has the potential of being a gate of revelation. In the same way that the 13th gate can be the mundane listener that is open, it's the fellowship of man that is open to others, you know, deeply empathic with others, but it doesn't mean that empathy leads to them recognizing secrets. And if you look at the mystical level of the 1333, that is, as the prodigal, as an energy force, you can see that this is the place where secrets can be revealed. And again, I'm not talking about, you know, the big mystical secrets. I'm talking about the fact that every tiny little thing is a mystical secret. I mean, every experience dealt with correctly has that potential of satori, has that potential of transcendence. And so for many who enter into the experience correctly, they can take the most mundane thing, and out of that the secrets are revealed. And you hear this in the mystical literature. The kinds of things that lead to the satori are so mundane. And all of a sudden the secret's there. Ah, I got it. You know, the great eureka. So when we're looking at the abstract process and we're looking at its expression, you can see that the identity is there to recognize what experience is worthy of sharing with the collective. And what secrets are worthy of sharing with the collective. I mean, I don't know how many there would be, but I guess if you went to the Library of Congress in the United States, where it's a large library, and looked up the title of books that had secret in them, you know, as a title. I mean, I don't know, 8 zillion, I mean, something like that. You know, all these secrets. And yet the magic is that no secret is universal. You know, that's the whole point. And until we get to that point that we understand that, we understand nothing. You know, because this is the propaganda of monotheism. I mean, and The existence that we have is strictly a binary. You know, the great secrets are always this and that, and they're always unique. Each of us has, in that sense, the potential to reveal the secret of the uniqueness. I mean, when I began to introduce incarnation crosses in the late 90s, I thought, you know, I was under enormous pressure from people who had a sense of, because I had introduced it with the G Center and the cross of the vessel and the Sphinx, I was really concerned. And I was really concerned because when you look at somebody's profile and you look at their cross, it's a terrible temptation for people to assume that that's what they are. And to really misunderstand that that's just a label, a designer label on the back of a pair of jeans, but your ass is different than mine. You know? I mean, how you're going to fill out that piece of clothing is going to be unique. This is all about uniqueness. It's all about unique authority. And the collective has to teach us that. And you can see that the not-self collective doesn't do that. It doesn't. You know, the collective figures that the only way that it can compete with the tribe is to be like the tribe. So it tries to create these collective tribes and then homogenize everybody into those collective rules. And there's very little space in that for mutation and difference and uniqueness. And you don't want to bring any of that to the religious areas because you end up with all of these problems, with all of these ingrained tribal religious feelings. I mean, tribal people get very upset when you try to bring them to the concepts of collective transcendence. You know, my glue is better than your glue, and our way is better than your way. And there's no such thing. It's why the tribe is so frightening to me. Locks everybody into one way. There's no such thing. There's no such thing, and it becomes something that cuts us off from what it is to truly be here. I'm tired of people just, you know, it was like why I stopped doing lectures. You know, I wanted to kill most of the people in the audience because it would have been a waste of time. And it is, most of the time, a waste of time. I mean, this is a very, very, very dense planet. The level of consciousness on this planet is minimal. It's minimal. And the tribe still rules in everything. I mean, look at all these people jumping around in St. Peter's Square. You got 1 billion people on this planet who are mourning, you know, the spiritual Christian leader. And all the old ceremonies. I mean, I don't understand. I've said this before. I mean, you know, the idea that you're going to have some nailed guy hanging from your neck every day. I don't get it. I don't get it that suffering is something that is enshrined. I don't get it. This is not the planet of suffering. This is propaganda. This is religious bullshit. This gives them power. I will make you happy in heaven. I will make you happy with your karma. You know, please. It's not the way it works. It's very, very difficult for the collective to touch anything but money. You know, you look at globalization, you see how well the collective can do when it's money. Hey, everybody's got the same banking system today. But the moment the collective tries to get into the, you know, all our gods are really the same, you know. Whoa, you hit a brick wall. Because they don't know what it is. Nobody ever taught them. Nobody ever raised them that way. I mean, can you imagine? You've got over 4 billion children who come into this world, these billions of children who are generators, and they're all treated like manifestors. And then you've got a planet that's deeply frustrated, that you've got people that don't do what's right, so you've got a planet of brutality, cruelty, abuse, the violence that's on this planet. It's unbelievable. You know, and this is the world generated for us by the generators. I mean, you know, the collective has a responsibility to educate. That real transcendence is understanding that everything about the collective process is that step by step we are here to expand our consciousness. And to expand our consciousness not through single voices of those that lead us as sheep, that guide us into fixed roles and fixed things, but to finally get to a point where each and every one of us are respected as unique beings. You know, it's like my political stance is about individual human rights. That's not individual political rights. It's individual human rights. Everyone has a right to be their own authority. Everyone. And the collective will go nowhere until that is the way it is. You know, what we do in terms of what you do when you go out there in your professional work, you know, is one by one. You know, one by one, you do what you can to show people that there is a pattern collectively that they can experiment with, that the pattern is not a lock, that they're not locked into a strict venue within that pattern, that the pattern is an open structure, and on the other side is their experience. You know, I've never awakened anyone. They awaken themselves. All I can do is teach. And what I teach is just information. And information is just logical patterns. It is only when the pattern is alive in experience that it can be verified. Then it can be shared from the perspective of the abstract. And it's not the number of students that I've had that have learnt the knowledge that have made the difference. It's the number of students I've had who have lived the knowledge that have made the difference. And this is the whole thing about understanding transcendence. First, you have to be able to present a pattern. And then you have to open the door to experience.